In the heart of Lagos, where towering glass buildings glittered like jewels against the Atlantic sun, stood the Azure Crest Hotel, a five-star luxury fortress reserved for the city's wealthiest elite, a place where power dined and arrogance lived like royalty. At its grand revolving doors stood Amara Okoye, a young woman in her late 20s with skin the shade of polished mahogany and eyes that carried storms and sunshine in equal measure. Her navy blue gown was modest but elegant, hugging her tall frame, and though her shoes were scuffed from weeks of endless travel, her posture radiated quiet dignity. She had just returned from London after completing a master's degree in international business, carrying with her not just a battered suitcase but dreams stitched with steel. Her late father, once a respected industrialist, had left her a legacy she was determined to rebuild. But none of that mattered to the hotel staff as she stepped inside. To them, she was just another tired black woman, alone, dressed too simply to belong among the polished marble floors and gold-plated chandeliers. The lobby smelled of imported roses and expensive perfume, and seated in the middle of it, all like a king on a throne, was Desmond Cole, CEO of the hotel chain, a man whose reputation for arrogance was as infamous as his fortune. He wore a cream-colored suit that screamed wealth, his wrist adorned with a watch worth more than a car, and he sipped his champagne with the smug ease of someone convinced the world belonged to him. His gaze swept lazily across the lobby until it landed on Amara, and in that instant, his expression hardened into disdain. "Security," he snapped, his deep baritone echoing off the marble walls. "Who let her in here? This isn't a shelter for strays." Amara froze, the words slicing through her composure like a knife. Guests turned to stare, their whispers crawling across the lobby like serpents. One of the guards approached her, his voice apologetic but firm. "Ma'am, Mr. Cole says you need to leave. You're disturbing the ambience." Amara's jaw tightened, her fingers curling around the handle of her suitcase. "I booked a room," she said, her voice steady, each syllable dipped in the kind of poise that could silence storms. "And I will not be treated like I am less than human." Desmond chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Sweetheart, people like you don't book rooms here. Now, if you don't want me to call the police, I suggest you walk out quietly." Heat crawled up Amara's spine, but she forced herself to smile, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that unsettled even the security guard. "Be careful, Mr. Cole," she murmured, her voice like velvet over steel. "The world has a way of turning tables when you least expect it." He waved dismissively, already returning his attention to his champagne, as though she were nothing more than a pesky shadow in his golden day. And so, under the weight of 100 judgmental eyes, Amara turned and walked out, her suitcase clicking softly against the tiled floor. Outside, the humid Lagos air wrapped around her like a promise, and her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from her family's attorney. "Board meeting in 20 minutes. You're officially the majority shareholder now. Congratulations, Madam Okoye." For a moment, Amara stood frozen on the pavement, her chest rising with a slow, powerful breath. She looked back at the towering hotel, the same fortress that had spat her out moments ago, and her lips curved again, but this time her smile was different. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was destiny sharpening its edges. 20 minutes later, the grand ballroom of the Azure Crest Hotel pulsed with quiet power as Lagos elite gathered for the emergency board meeting of Cole Luxury Holdings, the conglomerate that owned the chain of five-star hotels across Africa. Desmond Cole, still basking in the afterglow of humiliating Amara, strode into the room with the swagger of a man convinced his throne was unshakable. He didn't notice the hush that fell over the board members as he entered, nor the way their eyes shifted toward the tall, poised woman standing at the head of the table, a woman whose navy blue gown now seemed less like a traveler's outfit and more like the armor of a queen. Amara Okoye stood with her chin high, the storm in her eyes now harnessed into lightning. The attorney beside her cleared his throat, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the new majority shareholder of Cole Luxury Holdings, Madam Amara Okoye." Desmond stopped mid-stride, his smug expression curdling into disbelief as the words sank in. "What kind of joke is this?" he barked, his voice cracking with a kind of panic that tastes like metal in the mouth. Amara turned toward him slowly, her gaze steady, and for the first time he saw her, not as the woman he had dismissed minutes ago, but as someone carved from iron and fire. "No joke," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of an unspoken thunderclap. "Your company has been bleeding debt for years. My late father was your silent investor, the one who kept this empire standing while you flaunted your ego. Today his shares and his vision become mine." Gasps rippled through the room, and a few of the board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly calculating where their loyalties should fall. Desmond's laugh was hollow, desperate. "You run this empire. You don't belong in this world." Amara took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor like drumbeats of war. "I don't belong," she echoed, her voice rising like a tide. "Tell me, Mr. Cole, what does it take to belong? The color of my skin, the designer of my dress, or the balance in my bank account?" Her words were not just for him but for everyone in that room, slicing through the air with a kind of clarity that makes people uncomfortable because it is the truth they've been taught to ignore. She laid out her plan with surgical precision, restructuring the chain, cutting out corruption, rebranding to celebrate African excellence rather than imitate foreign luxury, and most importantly, replacing leadership that treated dignity like a privilege rather than a right. With every sentence, she became less of a newcomer and more of a force, a tide no one could resist. By the time she finished, the board had voted unanimously to instate her as CEO. Desmond stood rooted to the spot, his face pale with the realization that his reign had ended not with a battle but with a single stroke of destiny. Amara turned to him one last time, her smile calm but laced with the weight of poetic justice. "You threw me out of your lobby because you thought I was beneath you," she said, her voice like silk hiding steel. "Now you work for me, or you can walk out the same way you asked me to." For the first time in his life, Desmond had no clever retort, no champagne glass to hide behind. He lowered his gaze, the arrogance drained from his posture like water from a broken dam. As Amara signed the final document, the room erupted in polite applause, but she barely heard it. Her mind was already on the future, the hotels that would reflect not just wealth but respect, the employees who would never again be made to feel small, the little black girls who would walk into places like this and see themselves as they truly were, worthy. Outside, the same humid Lagos air embraced her again, but this time it felt like an ally. She stood on the hotel's steps as the sun dipped low, casting the building in shades of gold. Destiny hadn't just turned the tables, it had built her a throne.